Commander Zeth'kar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as the distress beacon pierced through the bridge's usual hum of activity. The Corthony Fleet commander had seen many emergencies in his 30 cycles of service, but something about this particular signal made his scales itch with unease. "Report, Sub-Commander Drex," Zeth'kar growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems before most beings learned to walk. Drex's tentacles danced across the holographic display with practiced efficiency. "Distress signal from Mining Colony 77 Alpha, sir. Complete communication blackout approximately 6 standard hours ago. Last transmission indicated human presence." The bridge fell silent, except for the soft whisper of recycled air. Zeth'kar's crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their collective opinion of humans and their tendency to complicate perfectly simple operations. "Humans?" Zeth'kar's voice carried the same tone most species reserved for discussing parasitic infections. "How many?" "Initial reports suggested a small transport vessel, sir. Perhaps 20 to 30 specimens at most." Drex paused, his voice taking on that particular quality that preceded bad news. "However, sir, the colony housed approximately 8,000 of our finest mining specialists." Zeth'kar's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary ones continued monitoring the tactical display. In his experience, mathematics involving humans rarely added up in any sensible fashion. 20 humans versus 8,000 Cathani should have resulted in 20 dead humans and a mildly amusing story for the officers' mess. Instead, they had silence. "Tell me, Weapons Officer Krex," Zeth'kar said, turning to address a particularly scarred veteran, "what is your professional opinion of human combat capabilities?" Krex's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Sir, I have personally witnessed humans attempt to fight our forces with nothing but primitive projectile weapons and sheer stupidity. They are, without question, the most tactically inept species we have encountered. They charge directly into superior firepower, make decisions based on emotions rather than logic, and somehow," he paused, his voice becoming uncertain, "somehow they keep winning battles they have no business surviving." "Fascinating," Zeth'kar mused, though his tone suggested he found it anything but, "and they're prisoners, the specimens we have captured for study." "Ah, yes, sir." Communications Officer Vix spoke up, her voice tinged with frustration. "The human prisoners present their own unique challenges. They refuse to provide useful intelligence, instead offering what they call sarcastic commentaries and helpful suggestions about our interrogation techniques. Yesterday one actually critiqued our torture methods and provided a detailed improvement plan." Zeth'kar felt that familiar sensation he had learned to associate with human involvement. The creeping certainty that his day was about to become significantly more complicated than originally planned. "Prepare the fleet," he commanded, his decision crystallizing with the weight of inevitability. "Full battle deployment. If humans are involved, we will settle this matter with overwhelming force and minimal conversation." Sir Drex ventured carefully, "Perhaps we should send a single reconnaissance vessel first?" Zeth'kar's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Sub-Commander, in my extensive experience with humans there is no such thing as minimal anything." The Corthony battle fleet dropped out of hyperspace with all the subtle grace of a meteor shower, their massive vessels casting shadows across the mining colony that had once been a testament to alien industrial efficiency. What greeted them, however, was something that defied every tactical manual Zeth'kar had ever studied. "Sir," Drex's voice carried the particular strain of someone trying to process information that simply refused to make sense. "Colony 77 Alpha appears to be, well, sir, it appears to be completely destroyed." Zeth'kar's 4 eyes focused on the main display, taking in the smoking ruins of what had been a thriving mining operation just hours before. Defensive turrets lay twisted into modern art sculptures, transport vessels sat cracked open like discarded shell casings, and the main processing facility looked as though someone had redesigned it using explosives and creative enthusiasm. "Casualty reports?" Zeth'kar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "All 8,000 personnel, sir. No survivors detected among our forces. Drex paused, his tentacles hovering uncertainly over his controls. However, sir, there is one life sign remaining. Location. Center of the main courtyard, sir, just standing there. Zeth'kar leaned forward in his command throne, studying the tactical display with growing confusion. In the middle of what looked like a battlefield designed by someone with a particularly violent imagination, a single red dot pulsed steadily on his screen. Visual confirmation, he ordered. The main screen shifted to show a human male, approximately average height for his species, wearing what appeared to be standard maintenance coveralls. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking around the devastation with the casual interest of someone waiting for public transportation. Occasionally he would check what Zeth'kar assumed was a timekeeping device and glance skyward. Is he waiting for us? Weapons Officer Krex asked, his voice carrying the bewilderment of a predator who had cornered prey, only to find it reading a book. Scanning for weapons, Drex announced. After a moment he added with audible confusion, Sir, he appears to be carrying nothing more threatening than a portable toolkit and what our computers identify as a sandwich. Zeth'kar watched as the human took a bite of said sandwich, chewed thoughtfully, and continued his patient vigil among the ruins of 8,000 of the galaxy's most feared warriors. This is either the most dangerous human in existence, Zeth'kar mused aloud, or the most spectacularly unlucky maintenance worker in the known universe. Orders, sir, Drex inquired. Deploy a full security team. I want that human brought aboard for immediate interrogation. Use maximum caution protocols. Zeth'kar paused, studying the figure on screen who had just finished his meal and was now examining what appeared to be a severely damaged atmospheric processor with professional interest. And someone explained to me how a single human with a toolkit managed to eliminate an entire colony of trained military personnel. As the shuttle bay doors opened to disgorge a squad of heavily armed Corthany soldiers, Zeth'kar couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to learn something about humans that would ruin his entire day, possibly his entire week. The human looked up as the shuttles approached, raised one hand in what appeared to be a friendly greeting, and waited with the patience of someone who had absolutely nowhere else to be. The interrogation chamber aboard Zeth'kar's flagship had been designed to break the will of the galaxy's most hardened criminals. Its stark metal walls, harsh lighting, and restraint systems had convinced countless beings to share their deepest secrets. The human currently seated in the center chair, however, seemed to be treating it like a particularly uncomfortable waiting room. State your designation, Zeth'kar commanded, his voice echoing off the chamber's acoustically enhanced walls. The human looked up with mild interest, as though he had just noticed Zeth'kar's presence. Marcus Chen, Senior Maintenance Technician, 3rd Class. Employee Identification Number, well, I suppose that doesn't matter much anymore, does it? Zeth'kar's scales rippled with irritation. In his experience, prisoners usually began interrogations with screaming, pleading, or at least a reasonable amount of cowering. This Marcus Chen person seemed more concerned with the ergonomics of his restraints. You are responsible for the destruction of Colony 77 Alpha, Zeth'kar stated, watching carefully for any reaction. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering this accusation, with the seriousness most beings reserved for weather reports. Well, technically speaking, I was just fixing the ventilation system when your mining operation decided to have what I can only describe as a very loud disagreement with some uninvited guests. Uninvited guests? Zeth'kar leaned forward, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the human's remarkably calm expression. Yeah, you know, Marcus waved one hand vaguely. Space pirates, freedom fighters, angry neighbors. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They all tend to shoot first and ask philosophical questions later. Zeth'kar's patience, already stretched thin by the day's events, began developing stress fractures. You expect me to believe that while you were performing routine maintenance, unknown attackers somehow eliminated 8,000 trained Corthany soldiers? Oh, they weren't unknown, Marcus replied cheerfully. I mean, they introduced themselves and everything. Very polite, really. Much better manners than most species I've encountered in this line of work. The interrogation chamber's temperature controls couldn't account for the chill that suddenly ran down Zeth'kar's spine. You spoke with these attackers? Sure did. Nice folks. They asked me to stay out of the way while they handled some business with your mining operation. I told them I just needed to finish recalibrating the atmospheric recycling systems, and they said that was fine as long as I didn't interfere with their work. Zeth'kar's secondary eyes began twitching, a sure sign that his legendary composure was approaching its operational limits. And during this conversation, did these attackers mention their intentions? Marcus appeared to consider this question with the gravity it deserved, which is to say, not very much at all. Well, they seemed pretty focused on your defensive grid, kept asking technical questions about power routing, system vulnerabilities, backup protocols, that sort of thing. And you answered these questions. Zeth'kar's voice had dropped to the low growl that usually preceded someone's extremely unpleasant demise. Oh no, Marcus said quickly, raising both hands in a gesture of innocence. I'm just a maintenance guy. I don't know anything about military systems. He paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Although I did mention that whoever designed your defense grid probably should have used isolated power coupling, instead of that daisy chain configuration you had going. Very inefficient. One little surge in the wrong place, and the whole system goes down like dominoes. The silence that followed this revelation stretched long enough for Zeth'kar to fully appreciate the magnitude of what he was hearing. You disabled our entire defensive network, Zeth'kar said slowly, while fixing the air conditioning. Marcus looked genuinely offended by this characterization. Hey now, I was fixing the ventilation system. Completely different department. And I didn't disable anything. I just pointed out some design flaws to some very interested parties who happened to be carrying military-grade explosives. Zeth'kar closed all four eyes and tried to remember why he had ever thought conquering the galaxy would be a relaxing career choice. The first explosion rattled Zeth'kar's flagship with enough force to rattle his teeth and send several junior officers sprawling across the bridge. Emergency klaxons began their urgent symphony, while status displays shifted from reassuring green to the distinctly less comforting red that usually preceded very bad days. Report. Zeth'kar barked, his four eyes darting between tactical displays that seemed determined to deliver nothing but terrible news. Multiple contacts, sir. Drex's tentacles flew across his console with the frantic energy of someone who had just realized his insurance premiums were about to increase dramatically. Unknown vessels emerging from, well, sir, they appear to be emerging from nowhere. Zeth'kar's flagship shuddered again as another impact sent shockwaves through the massive vessel's superstructure. Through the main viewport, he could see sleek fighter craft dancing between his fleet's heavy cruisers like deadly insects harassing much larger predators. How many ships? Zeth'kar demanded, watching his tactical display populate with an increasingly uncomfortable number of hostile contacts. Difficult to determine, sir, Weapons Officer Krex reported, his usual confidence replaced by the particular strain that came with being professionally embarrassed. Our sensors are detecting approximately 40 small craft, but they keep appearing and disappearing from our scopes. It's as though they're... He paused, clearly reluctant to voice what sounded like an impossibility, as though they're using some form of cloaking technology we cannot detect. Another series of explosions rocked the fleet, and Zeth'kar watched in growing horror as one of his heavy cruisers began listing to starboard, emergency lights flickering along its hull like a distress beacon. Sir, Communications Officer Vix's voice carried the particular pitch reserved for catastrophically bad news. The Dominator reports complete failure of their primary weapons systems. The Annihilator's shields are fluctuating wildly, and the Destroyer's engines just went offline entirely. Zeth'kar's scales began that familiar itching sensation that he had learned to associate with tactical situations spiraling completely beyond his control. System failures across multiple vessels? That's impossible. Our ships operate on completely independent networks. That's what I thought too, sir, Drex said, his voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone watching the laws of physics file for early retirement. But somehow these attackers seem to know exactly which systems to target for maximum disruption. Through the interrogation chamber's security feed, Zeth'kar could see Marcus Chen sitting calmly in his restraints, watching the proceedings with the interested expression of someone observing a particularly engaging sporting event. As Zeth'kar watched, the human maintenance worker actually appeared to be smirking. "Bring me that human," Zeth'kar roared, his patience finally achieving complete structural failure. Within moments, Marcus was escorted onto the bridge by a squad of very nervous guards. The human looked around the chaos with professional interest, nodding appreciatively at the tactical displays, showing his fleet's systematic dismantlement. "Nice work," Marcus commented, studying the battle progression with obvious approval. "Very clean, very efficient. Whoever planned this really knows their way around Corthany defensive protocols." "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose captors are under attack," Zeth'kar observed, his voice carrying the dangerous quiet that usually preceded someone's violent introduction to vacuum exposure. Marcus shrugged with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. "Well, panic never really improved anyone's situation, did it? Besides," he gestured toward a tactical display showing 3 more Corthany vessels suffering mysterious system failures. "Looks like everything's going exactly according to plan." "Whose plan?" Zeth'kar demanded, though he was beginning to suspect he really didn't want to know the answer. "Oh, you know how it is with humans," Marcus replied cheerfully. "We're terrible at following orders, but we're absolutely spectacular at making things up as we go along." He paused, watching as another enemy fighter performed an impossible maneuver that should have liquefied its pilot. "Although to be fair, some of us are better at the improvisation thing than others." The flagship lurched violently as something very large and very explosive made contact with the port shield generators. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in an apocalyptic red glow that perfectly matched Zeth'kar's mood. "Sir," Krex called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Unknown vessel approaching on attack vector. It's a single fighter craft, and it's requesting permission to dock." Zeth'kar's laugh held absolutely no humor whatsoever. "A single fighter wants to board my flagship, in the middle of a battle?" "Yes, sir. The pilot is transmitting standard diplomatic codes, but..." Krex hesitated, clearly struggling with information that refused to process correctly, "but the vessel appears to be of human design." Marcus Chen's smirk widened into something that could generously be called a grin. "Oh good," he said, with obvious satisfaction. "My ride's here." The tactical situation had just achieved a level of complexity that Zeth'kar was absolutely certain wasn't covered in any military academy textbook ever written. The docking bay of Zeth'kar's flagship had witnessed the arrival of diplomatic envoys, prisoners of war, and the occasional very lost cargo hauler. What it had never experienced was a single human fighter craft requesting permission to board during the middle of what could generously be described as a comprehensive military disaster. "Sir," Drex reported, with the strained voice of someone whose day had officially exceeded all reasonable expectations, "the human vessel has docked successfully. Bay 7 is sealed and pressurized." Zeth'kar watched his tactical displays with the growing certainty that the universe had developed a personal grudge against him. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by enemies who seemed to know exactly where to hit, when to hit, and how to make it hurt the most. And now apparently one of them wanted to drop by for a personal visit. "Deploy Security Team Alpha to the docking bay," Zeth'kar commanded. "Full combat protocols. I want that pilot detained immediately." "Yes, sir," came the crisp reply from Security Chief Nex. "Team Alpha is moving to intercept." For approximately 30 seconds, everything proceeded according to standard operating procedures. Then the security feeds from Bay 7 began displaying images that belonged in a tactical training manual under the chapter titled, "How Not to Engage Human Combatants." Security Team Alpha, consisting of 12 of the finest Corthany soldiers in the fleet, moved into position around the docked fighter with textbook precision. They had trained for scenarios involving hostile borders, desperate prisoners, and even the occasional space pirate with delusions of grandeur. None of their training had prepared them for what emerged from the human craft. A woman in pilot gear stepped out of the fighter with the casual confidence of someone arriving fashionably late to a dinner party. She surveyed the 12 heavily armed soldiers surrounding her with apparent interest, as though she were evaluating their equipment choices rather than planning her imminent surrender. What happened next occurred so quickly that the security feeds barely captured it. The woman moved with a fluid efficiency that transformed the docking bay into a brief demonstration of applied physics and creative problem-solving. Security Team Alpha found themselves unconscious, disarmed, or questioning their career choices in roughly that order. "Sir," Security Chief Nex's voice carried the particular bewilderment of someone watching their best people get professionally embarrassed by a single opponent. "Team Alpha is, well, sir, they're no longer operational." "Define no longer operational," Zeth'kar said, though he suspected he already knew what that meant in human terms. "They're all unconscious, sir. No casualties, but they've been disabled with what appears to be surgical precision. The intruder is proceeding toward the bridge through Corridor 7. As if responding to some cosmic sense of timing, the bridge's main doors opened with a soft hiss to admit the human pilot. She strolled onto the command deck with the relaxed bearing of someone taking a casual tour of the facilities, her hands empty but her presence somehow filling the entire space with quiet menace. Zeth'kar's security detail raised their weapons, but the woman simply raised one hand in what appeared to be a friendly greeting. Somehow, this gesture convinced 12 armed guards to hesitate just long enough for her to survey the bridge with obvious professional interest. "Nice setup," she commented, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had clearly been in similar situations before. "Very dramatic lighting. The whole evil empire's aesthetic really works for you." She was tall for a human, with short cropped hair and the kind of easy movement that suggested extensive military training. Her pilot suit bore no insignia, but everything about her posture screamed special operations in a language that transcended species barriers. Marcus Chen looked up from his position near the tactical displays and offered what appeared to be a wave. "Hey Sarah, right on time." The woman he had called Sarah nodded in acknowledgement before turning her attention to Zeth'kar. Her smile was polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of concern for the dozen weapons currently pointed in her direction. Zeth'kar found himself facing the most tactically impossible situation of his entire military career. His fleet was under attack by unknown forces, his security teams had been neutralized by a single opponent, and now he was hosting what appeared to be a family reunion in the middle of his command bridge. "Who is she?" Zeth'kar asked, though he was beginning to suspect that the answer would not improve his day in any measurable way. The woman's smile widened slightly, and Zeth'kar suddenly understood why humans had such a reputation for turning simple situations into complex disasters. Sarah Chen's smile carried the particular warmth that predators reserved for prey that had just realized their situation. She clasped her hands behind her back and regarded Zeth'kar with the professional courtesy of someone delivering very bad news in the most polite way possible. "Captain Sarah Chen, Human Special Operations Command," she announced with the casual tone most people used for weather observations. "And thank you for asking. It's always nice when people show proper interest in introductions." Zeth'kar felt his scales begin that familiar crawling sensation that had learned to associate with humans and their tendency to make his life significantly more complicated than necessary. "Special operations." "Oh yes," Sarah replied cheerfully. "Very special. The kind of special that involves extensive planning, careful coordination, and brothers who volunteer for extremely dangerous bait operations." She glanced toward Marcus with obvious affection. "Though I still think the whole standing around eating sandwiches while waiting for pickup part was showing off." Marcus shrugged with characteristic indifference. "Hey, I was hungry, and I figured if I was going to get captured by an entire alien fleet, I might as well have a decent meal first." The implications of this casual exchange began settling over Zeth'kar like a particularly unpleasant blanket. "Well, obviously," Sarah said, as though explaining something to a particularly slow child. We needed to draw your entire fleet away from your main operating bases. One lone human causing trouble at a mining colony? Perfect, irresistible target for someone with your reputation for, shall we say, overwhelming responses to minor problems. Zeth'kar's 4 eyes darted between the tactical displays showing his fleet's continued systematic destruction and the 2 humans who were discussing his strategic downfall with the casual interest of people reviewing a grocery list. The colony attack, he said slowly. Pieces of a very unpleasant puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in his mind. The defense grid failures. The maintenance. Access. Marcus really is excellent at his job, Sarah said with obvious pride. Give him 5 minutes with any mechanical system, and he can tell you exactly how to make it stop working in the most spectacular way possible. Very useful skill set when you're planning to disable military installations. But the other attackers, Zeth'kar began, then stopped as the full scope of the deception became clear. There were no other attackers. Marcus looked genuinely modest for the first time since his capture. Well, I had some help with the heavy lifting, remote access systems, pre-positioned charges, that sort of thing. But yeah, mostly it was just me and a really good understanding of Corthony engineering shortcuts. You see, Sarah continued with the patient tone of someone explaining a particularly clever magic trick. The beauty of the plan was that it relied entirely on your predictable response patterns. One human causes problems, and you bring an entire fleet to solve them. One human gets captured, and you waste valuable time with interrogations instead of securing your tactical position. Zeth'kar looked around his bridge, taking in the emergency lighting, the status displays showing ship after ship suffering critical failures, and the growing realization that he had been outmaneuvered by opponents who had planned for his every move. And while you were busy trying to figure out how one maintenance worker could disable an entire mining operation, Sarah said, her voice taking on a decidedly less friendly tone, my people were busy systematically dismantling your fleet, using the exact same access codes and system vulnerabilities that Marcus mapped out during his inspection tour. The command bridge fell silent, except for the steady beeping of alarm systems, and the distant rumble of explosions as more of Zeth'kar's ships discovered the creative limits of their structural integrity. Impossible, Zeth'kar whispered, though the evidence surrounding him suggested otherwise. You know what's really impossible? Sarah asked, her smile vanishing entirely. The number of civilian colonies your mining operations have destroyed, the slave labor camps, the systematic extermination campaigns. She took a step forward, and suddenly the casual visitor was gone, replaced by something considerably more dangerous. So here's what's going to happen, Commander Zeth'kar. Your fleet is finished. Your operations in this sector are terminated. And you, her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You get to explain to your superiors how 2 humans with a maintenance toolkit and a really good plan managed to end your entire military career. Sarah Chen moved with the fluid precision of someone who had performed this particular dance many times before. The bridge crew of Zeth'kar's flagship found themselves facing an opponent who treated armed combat like a carefully choreographed performance, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum waste. The first 3 security officers discovered that their weapons made excellent clubs when used against each other. The communications team learned that their own equipment could be creatively repurposed into very effective restraining devices. Weapons Officer Krex found himself wondering how his sidearm had ended up disassembled on the floor, while he remained mysteriously unconscious. Sarah, Marcus observed from his position near the tactical displays, his voice carrying the long-suffering tone of someone who had witnessed this routine many times before. You're being dramatic again. I'm not being dramatic, Sarah replied, smoothly avoiding a plasma burst while simultaneously relieving its owner of both weapon and consciousness. I am being thorough. There's a difference. You disabled their entire fleet before you even got here, Marcus pointed out reasonably. The whole single-handedly taking over the bridge thing is just showing off at this point. Sarah paused in her systematic dismantling of the remaining security team to give her brother a look that suggested years of similar conversations. and standing around eating sandwiches while waiting for extraction wasn't showing off. That was practical field nutrition, Marcus protested. Completely different thing. Zeth'kar, backed against his own command console, and watching his elite bridge crew being professionally embarrassed by a single human operator, finally understood the fundamental miscalculation that had doomed his fleet. Humans didn't fight wars the way civilized species did. They didn't follow predictable patterns or adhere to logical tactical doctrines. They improvised. They adapted. They turned every disadvantage into an opportunity and every weakness into a weapon. And apparently, they did it all while maintaining family conversations that belonged in a civilian transport, not a military operation. You know, Zeth'kar said, as Sarah approached his position with the inevitable certainty of orbital mechanics. I always wondered why every species in the galaxy warns against engaging humans in direct conflict. And now you know, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the professional courtesy of someone completing a job well done. We're absolutely terrible at following rules, but we're really good at making up new ones. The last thing Zeth'kar saw was Sarah's almost apologetic expression as she demonstrated another creative application of human innovation to the base of his skull. Marcus watched his sister efficiently secure the bridge and begin uploading extraction coordinates to her fighter. Through the main viewport, the scattered remains of what had once been a proud Corthony battle fleet drifted like expensive debris. You know, Marcus said conversationally, most sisters just worry about their brothers dating inappropriate people. But no, I get the one who responds to family emergencies with full-scale military operations. Sarah smiled as the extraction shuttle appeared on the horizon. What can I say? I'm overprotective. The universe, Marcus reflected, really needed to develop a better sense of humor about these things.